3 months after they handed me a folded flag and cold condolences, my sister sent a photo from an out-of-state notary office. The man signing a deed under a fake name had my dead husband's face. The real horror was not that he was alive. It was knowing how many people watched me drown in grief just to steal the money, cover their tracks, and silence the one person who could destroy their perfect lie. My name is Haley Nelson. I am 36 years old, and I live in a house that has forgotten how to breathe. It sits on the edge of Ashby Sound, a quiet, gray coastal town in Virginia, where the ocean constantly beats against the rocks like a tired heart. I am a compliance manager at Northline Integrity Group. My entire career is built on a foundation of professional paranoia. I analyze private risk, I audit corporate data, and I hunt for the hidden discrepancies that tell the true story behind the falsified numbers. I am paid to see the things that other people desperately want to keep buried. But when the greatest deception of my life walked right through my own front door, I was entirely blind to it. My husband, Wyatt Mercer, was a ghost long before he was officially declared dead. He served in a highly classified special operations unit attached to Task Group Vantage. Our marriage was built on a foundation of redacted schedules, sudden departures, and weeks of absolute silence. I knew the rules. I knew not to ask where he was going, who he was with, or what he was doing. I just kept the porch light on and waited. Then came the Tuesday that ended the waiting forever. It was raining. I remember the sound of the tires crunching on the wet gravel of the driveway. I opened the door to find 2 officers from the Defense Casualty Liaison Office standing on my porch. Their uniforms were pristine, sharply pressed, immaculate against the dreary backdrop of the storm. They stepped into my hallway and delivered the news. Wyatt had been killed in a foreign military operation. They spoke with a measured, rhythmic cadence that lacked any trace of human warmth. Their voices were flat, delivering the catastrophic news with an exactness that bordered on robotic. It did not feel like a genuine moment of human tragedy. It felt like a carefully crafted script, rehearsed 100 times in a sterile room before being performed on my doorstep. There was an explosion, a total loss, no chance of recovery. They used those clinical words to build an invisible wall around his death, ensuring there was no room for questions, and absolutely no room for a body to bury. The memorial service was a closed, suffocating affair. It was a parade of dark suits, tight lips, and forced handshakes. There was no casket to weep over, only a perfectly creased, tightly folded American flag that they pressed into my trembling hands. It felt unnaturally heavy. After the crowd dispersed, the liaison officer handed me a small, gray plastic box containing Wyatt's recovered personal effects. I sat on the cold hardwood floor of our bedroom, my hands shaking violently as I pried the lid open. Inside lay a cracked compass, his dog tags blackened by heat, and a tattered fabric unit patch. But my eyes immediately searched for one specific item, and the realization of its absence hit me harder than the official notification. His wedding ring was gone. It was a heavy, custom tungsten band that he swore he would never take off, not even in the field. When I confronted the officer about the missing ring, he offered a tight, sympathetic smile. He explained that in extreme blast conditions, small metallic objects are frequently lost or destroyed. His logic was sound, undeniably practical. Yet, deep in the pit of my stomach, it did not feel like an accident of war. It felt like a deliberate removal. It felt like a theft, before the dust had even settled on his memorial. The Mercer family descended upon my home. My mother-in-law, Deborah Mercer, and Wyatt's cousin, Travis Mercer, moved through my house with an unsettling urgency. They did not come to share memories or offer a shoulder to cry on. They came armed with thick manila folders and legal pens. "We just want to make this as easy as possible for you, Haley," Deborah murmured, her voice dripping with a saccharine sympathy that never reached her eyes. She patted my arm with fingers that felt cold and rigid. "You are in no state to handle this bureaucratic nightmare. Let us take the burden off your shoulders." Travis, a man who always wore a smile that looked like a threat, spread stack after stack of paperwork across my dining room table. There were benefit claims, life insurance payouts, and massive asset transfer authorizations. Just sign right here on the dotted lines. Haley, we will get the ball rolling immediately. The military machinery is notoriously slow, but I know the right people to fast-track all of this, he urged, tapping the pages impatiently. I was completely shattered, drowning in a dense fog of grief, barely capable of holding a pen. But the compliance manager inside me, the woman trained to spot fraud from a mile away, suddenly twitched to life. I stared at the documents. Many of them already contained electronic signatures and digital authorizations. Through the blur of my tears, I noticed how flawless they looked. The digital stamps were perfectly aligned, executed with a mechanical precision that felt entirely wrong. They looked suspiciously pre-prepared, generated and approved long before Wyatt was officially declared dead in that foreign desert. It was too fast. It was too clean. But the sheer weight of my depression crushed my professional instincts. I convinced myself I was just being paranoid, looking for conspiracies to avoid accepting the brutal truth. I signed the papers. I handed over the authority, just hoping they would take their folders and leave me alone in the suffocating quiet. But the quiet only bred more suspicion. I kept thinking about the memorial. There was a glaring absence that I could not ignore. A former teammate of Wyatt's, a man who had practically lived at our house between deployments, had not shown up to pay his respects. When I managed to corner a commanding officer at the reception to ask about him, the man immediately stiffened. His eyes darted toward the exit. There are some details regarding the operation and the team that need to be kept absolutely quiet right now, he stated, his tone dropping to a firm, unyielding whisper. Please understand, it is a matter of strict operational security. I did not understand. I just nodded blindly, retreating back into my shell. But the cold feeling of wrongness only grew larger. Every night became an agonizing ritual of self-torture. I lived amidst a museum of a dead man. I refused to move his muddy boots from the back porch. I left his razor exactly where he had placed it on the bathroom sink. I would bury my face in his heavy winter coat, inhaling the fading scent of his cedarwood cologne. Desperate for a phantom embrace, I spent hours sitting in the dark, clutching a glass of cheap wine, listening to his old voicemails on repeat. Hey, it is me. I'm going dark for a few days. I love you. Keep the porch light on. His voice was so vibrant, so utterly alive. The stark contrast between the man breathing through the speaker and the sterile, administrative way he had been wiped from existence drove me to the brink of insanity. Real death is inherently messy. It shatters lives and leaves jagged edges. But Wyatt's absence was pristine. It was packaged, sealed, and neatly filed away. It did not feel like a life tragically lost. It felt like a corporate account successfully closed out. Then came the night the fragile illusion shattered completely. I was sitting on the living room rug, wrapped in his old sweater, the voicemail playing for the 100th time. The grandfather clock in the hallway had just chimed past midnight. Suddenly, my phone vibrated violently against the floorboards. The bright screen illuminated the dark room, flashing the name of my younger sister, Brooke Nelson. I picked it up slowly, assuming it was just another one of her late-night welfare checks. She usually called when she knew my insomnia was winning. Hello, I whispered, my throat raw and aching. Haley, Brooke said. The tone of her voice made my blood run instantly cold. It was not a gentle, comforting greeting. It was a sharp, trembling gasp. She sounded entirely terrified, like someone who had just seen a ghost. Brooke, what is wrong? Are you okay? I asked, my spine stiffening as the heavy fog of grief temporarily parted. I am still at the office, she stammered, her words rushing out in a frantic wave. I know it is incredibly late. I was just catching up on some remote notary verifications for out-of-state property deeds. Haley, I need you to listen to me very carefully. And you absolutely cannot panic. Brooke, you are scaring the hell out of me. Just tell me what is going on right now. I heard her draw a ragged breath over the line. The silence between us stretched out, tight and fragile like a wire about to snap. When she finally spoke, her words tore down my entire reality. I am looking at a live verification photo on my monitor, she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the revelation. It was taken a few days ago at a notary office in a different state. The man sitting in the picture is finalizing a real estate purchase under a completely fake name. But Haley, I swear to God, I am staring right at him. It is Wyatt. He is alive. The air in my living room completely vanished. My lungs seized, tightening like a vice against my ribs. I pressed the phone harder against my ear, desperate to anchor myself to Brooke's voice. What are you talking about? I demanded, my voice breaking into a harsh whisper. Brooke, that is not funny. Do not say things like that. I am not joking, she insisted, her words rushing together in a panicked stream. Get to your computer. Right now. I am sending you a secure, encrypted link. You have to see this with your own eyes. I scrambled off the floor, my knees trembling so violently I almost collapsed against the coffee table. I practically tore the lid off my laptop. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh, pale glow across the dark room. I opened my email and clicked the link she had just sent. A password prompt appeared. Type in your maiden name and the year you were born, Brooke instructed over the speakerphone. I hammered the keys. The screen buffered for an agonizing second, then loaded a digital dossier. It was a standardized real estate closing file from the firm where Brooke worked in Cedar Mesa, New Mexico. Her entire job revolved around auditing high-value property transfers, verifying remote notarizations, and ensuring the identity of cash buyers. Scroll down to page 14, Brooke whispered. It is the webcam capture from the electronic notary session. I scrolled. My finger slipped on the trackpad twice before I finally reached the page. And then, the world stopped spinning. Time simply ceased to exist. Staring back at me from the center of the document was a high-resolution, time-stamped photograph. The name printed in bold letters above the image read, Evan Morrow. But the man in the picture was not Evan Morrow. It was Wyatt. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a scream that tore up my throat. I leaned so close to the screen that my nose almost touched the glass. The rational, analytical part of my brain, the compliance manager who dealt in facts and evidence, frantically searched for a flaw, a glitch, a mistake. I looked for a digital manipulation, a deepfake artifact, someone who just happened to share his bone structure. But there was no mistake. It was him. I knew the exact slope of his nose. I knew the slight asymmetry of his jaw. But more than anything, I knew the tiny, crescent-shaped scar resting just above his left eyebrow. A permanent reminder of a training accident from 5 years ago. I knew the way he sat. His right shoulder slightly rolled forward to guard a rotator cuff he had torn and never let heal properly. He looked different. Yes, his face was gaunt, the cheekbones sharp and prominent, as if he had dropped 20 pounds. A thick, unkempt beard covered his chin and jaw, obscuring the familiar dimple I used to trace with my thumb. But the eyes were the most jarring change. Wyatt had always possessed a steady, confident gaze. The man in this photo had the wide, hollow, hypervigilant eyes of a hunted animal. He was staring directly at the notary webcam, but his expression was coiled tight, radiating a silent, desperate tension. Haley, Brooke called out, her voice trembling. Haley, please say something. Tell me I am not crazy. Tell me you see it too. It is him, I gasped, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Dear God. Brooke, it is him. Look at the data stamp in the bottom right corner, she instructed, her tone shifting from panic to a grim, professional focus. I shifted my gaze. The bright red digital text burned into my retinas. October 12th. Exactly 11 days ago. A violent shiver ripped through my body. 11 days ago. That meant Wyatt had not just survived whatever hellish military operation supposedly claimed his life. He had survived, returned to the United States, established a completely fabricated identity, and lived long enough to purchase real estate in the middle of the desert, while I was sitting on my floor, sobbing into his old shirts and letting his family dismantle my life. He was sitting in front of a computer, signing his new name. "Watch your screen," Brooke said softly. "I am going to take remote control and zoom in on the background." The image on my laptop shifted and magnified, focusing on the top left corner of the webcam frame. Behind Wyatt, sitting on what looked like a cheap, floral-patterned motel bedspread, was a piece of luggage. It was an olive-drab canvas military duffel bag. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. It was not just any standard-issue bag. I recognized the heavy brass zippers and the custom, hand-stitched leather handle wrap. I had paid $200 to a local leather worker to make that handle for our 3rd wedding anniversary. He told me he took it everywhere. He still had it. "He bought a house, Haley," Brooke explained, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "It is an all-cash transaction for a secluded cabin just outside of Cedar Mesa. $250,000, wired directly from an offshore holding account into the escrow. No mortgage, no credit checks, no paper trail tying back to his real name. He is burying himself." A sudden, sharp wave of nausea washed over me. I pushed my chair back and took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing the compliance manager back to the surface. Panic was a luxury I could no longer afford. "Brooke, listen to me very carefully," I commanded, my voice suddenly stripped of all its tremor. "You cannot say a single word about this to anyone. Not your boss, not your coworkers. Do not flag the file." "What?" "Haley, we have to call the casualty liaison office. We have to tell Deborah and Travis. His family thinks he is dead." "No," I snapped, the volume of my voice startling even myself. "Think about this logically. Brooke, he is a special operator. He does not just accidentally fake his own death, create a flawless alias, and wire $250,000 in untraceable cash across the country. Someone with massive resources helped him do this. If his own military command told me he was blown to pieces, and his family rushed me to sign over all his life insurance and death benefits within 48 hours, then they are either completely oblivious, or they are in on it. If we make noise right now, this file will vanish, the money will move, and Wyatt will disappear for real. We cannot trust anyone." The line went silent for 10 long seconds. I could hear Brooke breathing heavily. "Okay," she finally agreed. "What do we do?" "I need hard copies of everything," I said. "Send the entire file to my secure home printer, every single page. The deed, the wire transfer receipts, the identity verification logs, everything." "Sending it now," she replied. The heavy laser printer in the corner of my home office whirred to life. It began spitting out page after page of undeniable proof. I stood over the machine, snatching the warm sheets of paper the moment they emerged. I spread them across my large oak desk, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon with practiced speed. I was no longer a grieving widow. I was an auditor hunting for the fatal flaw in a fraudulent ledger. I flipped through the property deed, the escrow agreements, and the tax declarations. Finally, I reached the last page. It was the physical signature acknowledgement form, required by the state of New Mexico for remote closings involving high-value cash wires. It required a secondary witness to physically sign alongside the buyer. I traced my finger down the page, past Wyatt's forged signature as Evan Morrow. My eyes landed on the witness signature block. The ink was hastily scrawled, a messy cursive loop that looked entirely insignificant to a casual observer. But beneath the signature, the witness had printed his legal name in stark, block letters, Reed Halverson. All the remaining air left the room. I slumped back into my leather chair, my hands gripping the armrest so hard my knuckles turned pure white. I knew that name. Reed Halverson was not some random real estate agent or a stranger pulled off the street to sign a paper. Reed Halverson was a senior commander in Task Group Vantage, He was Wyatt's direct superior officer. He was the very man who had supposedly signed off on the after-action report detailing my husband's tragic, fiery death in a combat zone. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together, forming a picture so ugly and terrifying it made my blood run cold. This was not a mistake. This was not a miracle of a soldier surviving behind enemy lines, suffering from amnesia, and wandering back home. The man who certified Wyatt's death was the exact same man sitting next to him in a cheap motel room, helping him buy a house with ghost money. Wyatt was not a victim. He was an active participant. They had looked me directly in the eyes, handed me a folded flag, and watched me shatter into a million pieces. They let me bury an empty box. They let me cry until I threw up. And the entire time, Wyatt was alive, hiding behind a fake name, while his commanding officer and his family orchestrated the massive financial windfall of his supposed death. I looked back at the printed photograph of my husband. The tears that had clouded my vision for the past 3 months dried up instantly, replaced by a cold, searing clarity. I did not feel relief that he was alive. I felt a deep, venomous rage taking root in my chest. This was a highly organized, heavily funded deception, and I was the only liability they had left in the dark. Grief is a paralyzing agent, but betrayal is pure, unadulterated adrenaline. When the sun rose the following morning, I did not cry. I brewed a pot of black coffee, tied my hair back, and opened my encrypted work terminal. I was done being the tragic, helpless widow. I was a senior compliance auditor for a private risk analysis firm, and someone had just handed me a ledger completely full of lies. I decided to start with the most obvious and universally reliable motive in the history of fraud: the money. Wyatt possessed 2 major life insurance policies. One was the standard military issue, and the other was a private, supplemental policy worth $600,000. The private payout was explicitly designated to settle the outstanding mortgage on our coastal home upon his death. I logged into the bank servicer portal, bypassing the primary dashboard to look at the raw back-end ledgers. The mortgage was still entirely active, completely unpaid. I began tracing the wire routing numbers associated with the insurance disbursement. The massive payout had not gone to the bank. It had been systematically chopped into 5 smaller, less conspicuous tranches, a classic money laundering technique known as smurfing. One of those specific tranches, exactly $120,000, had been diverted into a brand new joint checking account. I pulled the account creation documents from the bank registry. Right there, on the digital dotted line, was my electronic signature. It was the exact same digital authorization stamp Travis had rushed me into signing the week after the memorial service. The military death gratuity of $100,000 was even more brazenly mishandled. According to the Defense Finance Ledger, it never even touched my primary checking account. It was routed directly to an offshore corporate account belonging to a firm called Blackridge Logistics Consulting. I ran the name through my corporate registry databases at Northline Integrity Group. Blackridge had 0 employees, 0 physical offices, and a registered address that traced back to a vacant post office box in Delaware. It was a phantom shell company, constructed entirely out of thin air to catch the financial runoff of my husband's fabricated death. I needed serious legal firepower, but not the kind that operated politely or respected military brass. I hired Mara Quill. Mara was a private civil litigator specializing in corporate fraud and aggressive asset recovery. She operated out of a cramped, paper-filled office in downtown Richmond and possessed a reputation for being completely ruthless. When I sat across from her heavy mahogany desk and laid out the financial discrepancies, she did not offer me a single word of useless sympathy. She just pulled out a yellow legal pad, adjusted her glasses, and went to work. Within 2 hours, Mara had completely dismantled the official military casualty timeline. She pointed a sharp red pen at the Department of Defense death certificate I had brought her. "Look closely at the processing date, Haley," she instructed, tapping the heavy parchment paper. They stamped him as deceased in action with an unrecovered body exactly 14 days after the incident. That is statistically impossible. I have represented military families who waited 2 to 3 years for that specific classification. The military bureaucracy simply does not move this fast. It requires an extensive investigation, search and rescue protocols, and a mountain of red tape. Unless, of course, someone very high up the chain of command is heavily greasing the wheels to close the file prematurely. Her words triggered a distant, nagging memory. I drove back to my house, locked the heavy deadbolts, and booted up an old encrypted solid-state drive Wyatt used to keep hidden in his desk drawer. He always told me it was just for backing up his deployment photographs and training manuals. I bypassed the main firewall and cracked the secondary password using the exact date of our first anniversary. Tucked inside a hidden, partitioned drive was a folder of archived, secure emails. I found a message he had drafted to me just 3 days before his final mission. He never actually hit send, but it sat there in the drafts folder like a ticking bomb waiting to detonate. It read, "If things go sideways on this run, do not believe the first person who tells you to stay quiet." The implication was utterly staggering. He knew something deeply corrupt was unfolding before his boots ever touched the ground on that deployment. I dug deeper into the drive and found a frantic email thread between Wyatt and a combat medic attached to his unit named Colin Voss. Voss had emailed Wyatt a highly coded message regarding severe inventory discrepancies just hours before they left base. I immediately pulled out my phone and searched for Voss across every major social media platform, public directory, and veteran registry. He was a complete ghost. Every single profile, every forum account, every digital footprint belonging to Colin Voss had been meticulously scrubbed from the internet exactly 3 days after the official casualty report was filed. He was a living witness to whatever happened in that desert, and someone had forced him to vanish completely. My phone buzzed violently against the desk, startling me. It was Brooke. She had spent her entire lunch break digging through the county clerk public database in New Mexico. "I tracked the property deed for the cabin," she announced, her voice tight and breathless with anticipation. "Evan Morrow is listed as the primary buyer, but the property itself is shielded by a newly formed limited liability company called Apex Ridge Holdings." I pulled the incorporation papers and the tax routing information. "Who is the registered agent on the paperwork?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone until my knuckles ached. "You are going to absolutely hate this." Brooke sighed heavily. "The agent on file is Travis Mercer." My lungs burned as if all the oxygen had been sucked from the room. Travis. The grieving, supportive cousin who had stood in my dining room, holding my hand, playing the role of the protective family member while he practically stole the pen to forge my name and steal my financial security. He was the architect of the financial shelter hiding my very much alive husband. "I have one more thing," Brooke said softly, breaking the heavy silence. "I managed to extract the actual video recording of the remote notary session. I am sending the high-definition file to your secure server right now. You need to watch it. Haley." A heavy encrypted video file appeared in my inbox a moment later. I clicked download. The screen went black for a second before the surveillance video began to play. The resolution was grainy, but the overhead fluorescent lighting in the notary office was harsh enough to see absolutely everything clearly. There he was. The still photograph had been a massive, paralyzing shock, but seeing him in continuous motion was a completely different kind of psychological violence. I watched Wyatt adjust the collar of his cheap flannel shirt. I watched him rub his thumb over the small, crescent-shaped scar above his left eyebrow, a nervous tic I had watched him do 1,000 times before while watching television on our couch. I heard him clear his throat, a deep, raspy sound that resonated in my chest like a physical blow. When the notary off-camera asked him to state his full legal name for the official public record, he looked directly into the camera lens. "Evan Morrow," he said. It was his voice. The exact same baritone voice that had left me those desperate voicemails I cried over every single night for the past 3 months. The absolute, undeniable reality of the situation crashed over me, washing away the last remnants of my denial. There were no more alternate theories. There were no more shadows of a doubt to hide behind. The man I loved had actively chosen to become a ghost, and he had willingly let his entire family turn me into a blind, grieving human shield to cover their tracks. The silence in my house was no longer empty. It felt thick, heavy with the weight of unseen eyes. I invited Deborah over for lunch on a Tuesday afternoon, playing the part of the lonely, desperate widow seeking comfort. She sat across from me at the kitchen island, nursing a mug of herbal tea, her posture rigidly upright. I poured my coffee, taking a slow sip before dropping the bait. "Brooke called me the other day," I said, keeping my voice utterly devoid of suspicion. She was traveling out west for a property appraisal. She said she saw someone at a gas station who looked exactly like Wyatt. The reaction was instantaneous. Deborah did not gasp. She did not drop her mug in a sudden wave of fresh grief. Nor did she ask for details like a desperate mother clinging to a ghost. Her back snapped perfectly straight, and her eyes hardened into twin chips of dark ice. The air between us dropped 10 degrees in a single second. "That is an incredibly cruel thing to say, Haley," Deborah snapped, her voice vibrating with a sharp, defensive edge that sounded remarkably like panic. "My son died a hero. Do not tarnish the honor of the dead with these ridiculous, hysterical delusions." I carefully set my coffee mug down, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had not said I believed he was alive. I had only mentioned a passing resemblance. Yet, her immediate instinct was to aggressively shut the conversation down, to protect a narrative I had not even officially challenged. "I know he is gone, Deborah," I replied softly, casting my eyes downward to hide the cold realization settling in my mind. It just startled her, that is all. She left shortly after, her farewell stiff and hurried. But the suffocating presence in my home only intensified when Travis dropped by unannounced 48 hours later. He strolled through my front door with a fake, sympathetic smile plastered across his face, carrying a cardboard box of takeout food I did not ask for and could not stomach. He paced around my living room, running his hand over the back of the sofa, evaluating my home not as a place of mourning, but as a depreciating asset. "This place is just too big for one person. Haley," Travis sighed, leaning against the doorframe with forced casualness. "You are drowning in memories here. Every corner of this house is just a reminder of him. You should seriously consider putting it on the market. Let me help you list it. I can also help you manage whatever is left of the insurance money. You need a fresh start, far away from all this heavy baggage." I forced myself to nod, thanking him for his boundless generosity, all while my stomach churned with pure disgust. He wanted the house sold. He wanted the remaining liquid assets firmly under his control before I accidentally stumbled upon the massive financial crater they had dug in my name. The true extent of their surveillance became terrifyingly clear the very next morning. Brooke drove over before work to help me take my car to the mechanic for a routine oil change. As we stood in my driveway, she knelt down to retrieve a dropped set of keys near the rear tire. She froze, without a word. She slid further under the bumper, reaching up behind the metal frame. When she stood back up, her face was completely drained of color. Resting in the palm of her hand was a small, black, magnetic tracking device. They were not just managing my money, they were managing my every move. They had been watching me since the moment I started asking questions about the missing wedding ring and the closed casket. The psychological warfare escalated into physical violation 3 nights later. I had spent the evening at Brooke's apartment, strategizing our next move. When I returned home, the front door was locked, exactly as I had left it. But the moment I stepped into the hallway, the temperature felt wrong. A cold draft swept through the corridor. The back patio window had been professionally jimmied open. My breath caught in my throat. I moved silently through the dark house, grabbing a heavy iron fire poker from the hearth. I checked the living room. The expensive television was untouched. I moved to the bedroom. My jewelry box sat undisturbed on the dresser, completely full of valuable pieces. Then I stepped into my home office. The room was a disaster. The bottom drawer of my heavy oak desk had been violently pried open. The wood splintered and cracked. It was the specific drawer where I previously kept my insurance policies, the official death certificate, and the physical copies of the military reports. It had been completely emptied, the files scattered frantically across the rug. They had come looking for evidence. Fortunately, my professional paranoia had forced me to relocate the notary photographs, the limited liability company documentation, and the real financial records to a secure safety deposit box 2 days prior. They found nothing but the decoy papers I had intentionally left behind. But the message was loud and clear. The walls of my own home were no longer safe. I was being actively hunted by my own in-laws. The next afternoon, I sat in Mara Quill's cramped office, slamming the black tracking device onto her desk. I told her about the break-in, my voice trembling with a toxic mixture of fear and absolute fury. Mara did not flinch. She simply pushed her glasses up her nose and spun her laptop monitor around to face me. I followed the corporate trail on Travis Mercer's shell company, Apex Ridge Holdings, Mara explained, her tone entirely businesslike. Travis is the registered agent, but the initial seed funding for the company came from a corporate holding account tied to a civilian defense contractor named Vale Arden. Arden is the chief executive officer of Aegis Frontier Solutions. They handle classified logistics and private security contracts for the Department of Defense. I stared at the screen, the names blurring together. Where does Reed Halverson fit into this? Halverson is a silent partner in Aegis Frontier Solutions, Mara replied, tapping a heavily redacted financial ledger she had legally subpoenaed. He uses his military clearance to award lucrative logistical contracts directly to Vale Arden. Travis Mercer manages the dirty money on the domestic front, cleaning it through real estate purchases. They are a perfectly insulated triangle of fraud, and your husband is the ghost they created to facilitate a massive, untraceable payout. The room began to spin. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the overwhelming magnitude of the conspiracy. But an old, terrifying memory suddenly forced its way to the front of my mind. I remembered the first week after the funeral. I was a complete shell of a human being, unable to eat, unable to sleep. Deborah had come over with a stack of papers, stroking my hair, telling me I needed to sign a temporary authorization so she could handle the funeral expenses and the immediate utility bills while I grieved. I had blindly scribbled my name on the bottom line, desperate for her to just leave me in peace. Mara, I whispered, my voice cracking. The week after the memorial service, Deborah made me sign a document. She called it a temporary authorization. I never read it. Mara's expression darkened. She turned back to her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she accessed the county legal registry. A minute later, she pulled up a scanned document. It was not a temporary authorization for utility bills. Haley, Mara said quietly, pointing to the bold heading at the top of the page. This is a comprehensive, durable power of attorney. You legally granted Deborah and Travis Mercer absolute, unrestricted authority to act on your behalf in all financial, real estate, and legal matters. The air rushed out of my lungs. I slumped back against the leather chair, staring blankly at my own signature on the screen. It was the key to the entire kingdom. They did not need to forge my name on the bank transfers or the insurance payouts. I had willingly handed them the pen. The ultimate betrayal was not hidden in a foreign desert or a remote notary office in New Mexico. It was right here, wrapped in the comforting arms of the people who had held me while I wept over an empty box. The mother who had wiped my tears, the cousin who had brought me food, the commanding officer who had handed me the folded flag. They were all standing in a circle around my drowning body, not to throw me a lifeline, but to firmly push my head back under the water. Cedar Mesa was a landscape of cracked earth and suffocating heat. Brooke and I spent 4 agonizing days sitting in a rented sedan at the edge of a dusty county road. Mara had given us strict, non-negotiable instructions before we left Virginia. We were not to trespass. We were not to break any local ordinances or alert the local authorities. We were there to gather actionable intelligence, not to stage a reckless raid that would tip our hand. We parked a quarter-mile down from the secluded cabin registered to Apex Ridge Holdings, baking in the sun, watching the property through high-powered binoculars. On the afternoon of the fourth day, a rusted pickup truck turned into the gravel driveway. The man who stepped out was my husband. I watched him through the magnified glass. He moved with a frantic, jerky energy that was entirely foreign to the calm, collected soldier I had married. He checked his rearview mirror twice before killing the engine. He scanned the dense tree line surrounding the property, his posture rigid, shoulders hunched like a fugitive waiting for the sirens to wail. He did not look like a man enjoying a second chance at life, flush with stolen cash. He looked like a prisoner of his own survival. I did not run to him. I did not shed a single tear. I told Brooke to keep the engine running and the doors locked. I stepped out of the car and walked deliberately up the gravel path. The crunch of my boots over the rocks caught his attention just as he reached his front porch. He was holding a small stack of mail. He turned around. The envelope slipped from his fingers, scattering across the dirty wooden planks. All the blood instantly drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray beneath his thick beard. For a split second, I saw his muscles tense. His right foot pivoted backward toward the open front door. His absolute first instinct upon seeing his grieving wife was to run away. That single, involuntary flinch told me everything I needed to know. He knew exactly what he had done to me. "Haley," he choked out, the sound barely scraping past his throat. "You should not be here." "That is an interesting greeting from a dead man," I replied. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any warmth, hysteria, or relief. I stopped 10 feet away from him, keeping my distance as if he were a biological hazard. He took a hesitant step forward, raising his hands palms outward as if to placate a wild animal. "Please, just let me explain. It is not what you think. It is complicated. You bought a house for $250,000 in cash while I was picking out floral arrangements for an empty casket," I stated, my tone sharp and lethal. "Do not insult my intelligence by telling me there is a misunderstanding." Wyatt's shoulders slumped. The heavy burden of his lie seemed to physically crush him under the desert sun. He looked around frantically, terrified that the brush had ears. "The operation went completely sideways," he began, his voice dropping to a harsh, desperate whisper. "It was a total bloodbath. But it was not enemy fire that destroyed our convoy. It was a staged ambush. Somebody on the inside orchestrated it to cover up the theft of millions of dollars in classified tactical assets, high-grade communications arrays, prototype drone guidance systems, weapons that sell for an absolute fortune on the black market." He took a ragged breath, pointing a shaking finger at his own leg. "I barely made it out alive. I was bleeding out from a severe shrapnel wound to my thigh. But before I could reach an official military extraction point, Reed Halverson intercepted me. He did not take me to a military hospital. He threw me into an unmarked van and locked me in a private surgical clinic run by Aegis Frontier Solutions." "And you just stayed there?" I demanded, crossing my arms over my chest to keep my hands from shaking. "I had no choice," Wyatt pleaded, his eyes begging for a shred of empathy I no longer possessed. "Reed told me that if I miraculously returned from the dead, he would pin the entire missing inventory on me. He had already forged the supply logs. He had enough fabricated evidence to send me to a federal penitentiary for the rest of my life for treason and arms trafficking. He told me the only way to survive was to accept the casualty report, take a fake name, and wait. Wait for what? Wait for the financial tracks to be completely scrubbed," he answered bitterly. "He needed me off the board until the internal military audit closed out the lost inventory." I stared at the man I had promised to spend my life with. I processed his words through the cold, analytical filter of a compliance auditor. "You were in a private clinic," I said, stepping closer, my voice turning into a quiet, venomous hiss. "You were awake. You were healing. You had the ability to speak. You could have picked up a phone. Wyatt, you could have called me. He looked down at the gravel, unable to meet my furious gaze. I was trying to protect you. Reed and Vale Arden made it explicitly clear. If I reached out to you, if I gave you even a single hint that I was breathing, they would drag you into the crosshairs. They would frame you as a co-conspirator who helped me fence the stolen equipment. They threatened your life. Haley, I stayed dead so you could stay safe. The sheer audacity of his justification made my stomach churn with disgust. Do not dare disguise your cowardice as some noble sacrifice, I spat, the words cutting through the dry air like a knife. You did not protect me. You let your commanding officer and your own family tear my life apart. You let me collapse on the floor of our bedroom every single night, begging God to bring you back. You watched me drown in a play that you knew was entirely fake. You chose your own skin over my sanity. Wyatt flinched as if I had struck him directly across the face. He did not argue. He reached into the inner pocket of his worn canvas jacket. My muscles instantly tightened, bracing for a threat. But he slowly pulled out a small, heavy encrypted flash drive. He held it out to me. I snatched it from his hand, my fingers carefully avoiding his skin. I know I cannot fix this, he said, his voice thick with a miserable, defeated resignation. I know you will never forgive me. But I have not just been hiding out here waiting for orders. I have been compiling everything. That drive contains the original serial numbers of every piece of equipment Reed stole. It has the authentic, unaltered delivery manifests. And it has an audio recording. A recording of what? I asked, gripping the small piece of plastic tightly in my palm. A recording of Reed visiting my room at the clinic, Wyatt explained. I managed to record it on a burner phone. You can hear his voice perfectly. He explicitly details the money laundering scheme and orders me to just stay dead for a few more months until the heat dies down. This was the exact ammunition Mara needed. It was the physical link that tied the military fraud directly to the civilian contractors and the fabricated death. It was the smoking gun. But as I turned my back to him, ready to walk back to the car and leave him in his self-made prison, Wyatt spoke again. You need to be extremely careful going back home, he warned, his eyes darting nervously toward the empty road. You think my cousin tracking your car is the worst of it. But Travis and Deborah are just the foot soldiers. They are not the ones analyzing your every move. I stopped and turned my head slightly, glaring at him over my shoulder. What are you talking about? How do you think Reed knew exactly when you started looking into the insurance payouts? Wyatt asked grimly. How do you think Vale Arden knew you were digging into the real estate files? They do not just have eyes on your house. Haley, they have eyes inside your office. My heart skipped a beat. Who? Wyatt took a deep, trembling breath. The man feeding them your daily schedule, monitoring your corporate terminal, and reporting your every move is Owen Pike, your boss at Northline. The revelation hit me like a physical blow to the sternum. Owen Pike, the mentor who had granted me unlimited bereavement leave. The man who had sent a massive, expensive floral wreath to the memorial service and promised me that my job would always be waiting for me whenever I was ready. The rot did not just infect my family and my marriage. It had completely consumed my entire professional sanctuary. I stood in the middle of the desert, holding the digital evidence of my ruined life, realizing that my war was no longer just about grief. It was about meticulously dismantling every single person who thought they could bury me alive. The flight back from New Mexico was the quietest 5 hours of my life. I did not shed a single tear. The woman who had wept on the hardwood floor of her bedroom was dead, buried somewhere in the desert sand alongside my husband's fake grave. In her place sat a lead compliance auditor. I compartmentalized my reality into 2 distinct boxes. The first box contained the truth. The second box contained punishment. Returning to Northline Integrity Group on Monday morning required the performance of a lifetime. I walked through the heavy glass doors wearing an oversized gray sweater, my hair pulled into a messy knot, projecting the image of a woman barely holding herself together. Owen Pike. my boss, met me near the employee break room. He offered me a warm, paternal smile, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Take all the time you need, Haley," Owen murmured, his eyes crinkling with practiced sympathy. "We are just glad to have you back in the building. Do not push yourself too hard today." "Thank you, Owen," I whispered, keeping my gaze lowered, staring at his polished Italian leather shoes. "I just need the routine. I need a distraction from the quiet house." He nodded approvingly, completely blind to the fact that I was mentally measuring him for a coffin. I retreated to my cubicle, logged into my secure corporate terminal, and began my actual work. I bypassed my standard daily audits and slipped into the restricted archives for corporate contracts. I ran a silent, encrypted query for Aegis Frontier Solutions. The system returned a massive cache of subcontracts. I narrowed the search parameters to the 4 weeks immediately preceding Wyatt's reported casualty date. There it was, a comprehensive logistical risk assessment commissioned by Aegis and personally approved by Owen Pike. The file detailed a massive transfer of high-value tactical hardware, flagged by our automated system for severe inventory discrepancies. A normal auditor would have halted the entire supply chain immediately. Owen had manually overridden the system warnings, stamping the shipment as fully compliant. He had seen the theft happening in real time and deliberately looked the other way, securing his own lucrative financial kickback while signing my husband's death warrant. Later that evening, my dining room transformed into a tactical war room. Brooke sat at one end of the long wooden table, her laptop glowing in the dim light, while Mara Quill occupied the other, surrounded by thick binders of corporate case law. Brooke had spent the past 48 hours ripping through public property records across 3 different states. "Travis is a very busy man," Brooke announced, sliding a printed spreadsheet across the polished wood. "He is not just managing the New Mexico property. I found 6 different limited liability companies registered to his name over the last 2 months. He purchased a commercial warehouse in Nevada, 2 residential duplexes in Arizona, and a large block of vacant land in Texas. Every single transaction was completed entirely in cash. He is acting as the primary mule, washing the stolen defense money through real estate." Mara adjusted her glasses, making a sharp checkmark on her yellow legal pad. "And the exact moment we file the civil suit. He will attempt to liquidate all of it and transfer the funds to offshore accounts. We cannot give him the opportunity to run. I am drafting a series of ex parte injunctions. When we finally pull the trigger, I will have a federal judge freeze every single asset connected to those shell companies simultaneously. We are going to lock them inside their own vault." To build an ironclad case, Mara needed the exact serial numbers of the stolen military hardware to match the fraudulent risk assessments Owen had approved. I had the flash drive Wyatt gave me, but the raw data was heavily encrypted and required contextual verification. I had to use him. I purchased a cheap, untraceable prepaid phone with cash and dialed the secure number he had provided. "Haley," he answered on the second ring, his voice thick with a desperate, pathetic hope. "Do not use my name on this line," I ordered, my tone perfectly flat, slicing through his delusion of a romantic reconciliation. "I am not calling to discuss our marriage. I need the cargo manifests for the drone guidance systems. I need the exact dates they were loaded onto the transport trucks, and I need the names of the quartermasters who signed them over to Reed Halverson." He hesitated for a fraction of a second, the cold reality of our new dynamic settling over him. He was no longer my partner. He was an informant, a compromised asset that I was actively managing to achieve an operational objective. He rattled off the dates and the names, his voice entirely hollow. I wrote them down, disconnected the call, and instantly removed the battery from the plastic phone. A legal victory was not enough for me. Legal battles could be sealed, settled, and hidden behind closed doors by powerful defense contractors. I wanted them completely exposed to the harsh light of day. I left my house late Tuesday night, leaving my primary cell phone on the kitchen counter to defeat any location tracking devices, and drove to a rundown diner on the outskirts of the city. Waiting for me in a back booth was Tess Rowan. Tess was an independent investigative journalist who had spent the last 10 years hunting corrupt defense contractors. She had a reputation for being absolutely fearless and strategically brilliant. I slid a thick manila envelope across the sticky table. It contained a redacted summary of the financial laundering, the forged notary documents, and the undeniable connection between Aegis Frontier Solutions and Northline Integrity Group. "What am I looking at?" Tess asked, her sharp eyes scanning the first printed page. "You are looking at the biggest defense fraud scandal of the decade," I replied quietly. A commanding officer faking the death of a special operator to cover up the theft of millions of dollars in classified hardware, facilitated by a civilian contractor and covered up by a private auditing firm. I am giving you the exclusive rights to the entire story. Tess looked up, a predatory gleam in her dark eyes. Why come to me instead of the federal authorities? Because the federal authorities move slowly, and these people have friends in extremely high places. I explained. I need you to build the narrative. I will tell you exactly when to publish it, when the trap springs. I want the legal freeze and the media explosion to happen on the exact same day. I want them to wake up to a world where they have no money and absolutely nowhere to hide. Tess tapped the envelope against the table and offered a sharp, dangerous smile. Consider it done. Returning home, I found a missed call from Deborah on my landline answering machine. She had left a voicemail, her voice dripping with that sickening, performative sorrow, reminding me about a charity luncheon for fallen soldiers she desperately wanted me to attend. I listened to it twice, dissecting the psychological manipulation. Deborah was the ultimate emotional shield. She used her status as the grieving mother of a dead hero to create an impenetrable moral barrier around their crimes. Anyone who dared to question the money or the rapid timeline would be immediately attacked for disrespecting a grieving family. She and Travis firmly believed they had me perfectly contained. I decided to let them keep believing it. I would not confront them. I would not scream, throw plates, or demand immediate answers. I would continue to sip tea in their kitchen. I would continue to look lost, broken, and heavily medicated by grief. If you want to catch a dangerous predator, you do not wave a weapon in their face. You play dead. I stood by the living room window, looking out at the dark, restless ocean. My eyes were entirely dry. The time for crying was over. The most effective revenge is never a sudden, reckless explosion of anger. It is a quiet, meticulous orchestration. It is laying out the pieces, smiling warmly at your enemies, and waiting patiently for them to confidently step right into the steel jaws of the trap you built just for them. The official letter arrived on a Thursday. It bore the heavy, embossed seal of the Department of Defense Finance and Accounting Service. I read the single page twice, my mind instantly calculating the strategic value of the words printed on the thick paper. Due to a post-deployment record adjustment regarding combat hazard pay and classified operational stipends, my husband's estate was entitled to an additional disbursement of $82,000. It was a bureaucratic anomaly, a delayed payout that had slipped through the cracks of their initial, rushed cover-up. To me, it was not money. It was the perfect, bloody piece of meat to drop into a pool full of starving sharks. I invited my mother-in-law and my husband's cousin to my house the following evening. I made sure the living room was dimly lit. I wore the same oversized sweater I had been drowning in for 3 months. I poured them both glasses of expensive red wine, leaving my own cup entirely untouched. I placed the government letter in the center of the coffee table, right next to a framed, smiling photograph of the man they had helped bury alive. "I cannot do this anymore," I whispered, letting my voice crack with carefully rehearsed exhaustion. I rubbed my temples, staring blankly at the floorboards. Every time I check the mail, every time the phone rings, it is just another form, another reminder. I feel like I'm suffocating in this house. I think I need to sell it. I need to move away, maybe out west, and just start completely over. Travis leaned forward, his eyes immediately locking onto the embossed government letter. He picked it up, scanning the exact dollar amount with the practiced speed of a predator. $82,000, Travis murmured, trying and failing to hide the greedy spark in his tone. He looked up at me, his expression melting into a mask of deep, familial concern. This is exactly what I was talking about. You are trapped in an endless administrative nightmare. You should not have to deal with the military right now. You need to focus on healing, not chasing down residual combat pay. Deborah reached out and patted my knee. Her touch felt like a physical weight. Travis is right. You have been so incredibly strong. But everyone has a breaking point. Let us handle this final adjustment. I just want it all to be over. I sighed, leaning back against the sofa cushions. Travis did not waste a single second. The very next morning, he returned to my house carrying a sleek leather briefcase. He produced a freshly printed stack of legal documents. It was a secondary, highly specific power of attorney, designed explicitly to grant him the legal right to intercept and route the new supplementary military disbursement directly into a trust of his choosing. He handed me a silver pen, promising me that this would be the absolute last time I ever had to think about military finances. He just wanted to spare me the headache. He did not see me as a grieving relative. He saw me as an open vault, completely unaware that the lock had already been changed. I told him I needed to read it over quietly and would bring it to the bank on Monday. He looked mildly annoyed by the delay but agreed, not wanting to spook the mark. The moment his car pulled out of my driveway, I scanned the entire document and sent it to Mara. 3 hours later, Mara called me from her secure line. I ran the document through a forensic handwriting analysis program, comparing the digital signature line Travis pre-filled on this new contract with the forged electronic signatures used to drain the primary life insurance policy, Mara reported, her voice vibrating with predatory satisfaction. It is a 99% biometric match. He used the exact same digital tracing software. He just handed us the physical proof that connects him directly to the initial fraud. We have him. The final stage of the trap required a physical location, a place where their false confidence could be recorded and weaponized. Brooke, utilizing her professional credentials as an out-of-state property auditor, formally requested a secure conference room at my primary bank branch in downtown Ashby Sound. She set the meeting under the guise of finalizing the preliminary paperwork to liquidate my house and transfer the remaining estate funds. Monday morning arrived with a bitter, biting cold. I walked into the bank wearing a sharp black trench coat, leaving the oversized grief sweaters at home. Brooke was already waiting in the glass-walled conference room, arranging a stack of heavy manila folders on the polished mahogany table. Travis and Deborah arrived exactly 10 minutes later. They walked in with the absolute arrogance of people who believed they were holding every single winning card. "We really appreciate you facilitating this, Brooke," Travis said smoothly, taking a seat across from my sister. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, completely relaxed. "It is time we got her affairs entirely settled so she can finally move on." "That is exactly why we are here," Brooke replied, her tone perfectly polite, betraying absolutely nothing of the legal guillotine hanging over his neck. I sat at the head of the table, remaining entirely silent as Travis pushed the new power of attorney documents toward me. He tapped the signature line with a manicured fingernail. "Just sign right here, and the supplementary funds will be routed into the estate trust by Friday," he instructed. I picked up the pen, rolling the cold metal between my fingers. I looked up and met Deborah's gaze. "It just feels so wrong," I murmured, playing the hesitant victim one last time. "Taking this money, it feels like I am officially erasing him, like I am closing the book on Wyatt forever." Deborah sighed, a sharp, impatient sound. She leaned across the table, her eyes hard and devoid of any maternal warmth. "You have to stop clinging to ghosts. You cannot keep letting his memory dictate your future. Wyatt should not be your problem anymore." The entire room went completely still. Brooke's fingers froze over her laptop keyboard. My grip on the silver pen tightened until my knuckles ached. Wyatt should not be your problem anymore. It was a fatal, arrogant slip of the tongue, a mother speaking about a dead, Heroic son would never use those specific words. A grieving mother would say his death was a tragedy, or his absence was a void. But she called him a problem. You do not solve a dead man. You only solve a living liability. She had just accidentally confirmed, in a room full of witnesses and a running audio recorder hidden in Brooke's briefcase, that she viewed my husband as an active, manageable issue. At that exact second, my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the illuminated screen. It was an encrypted file transfer from the burner number I had given Wyatt. He had finally sent the raw audio. I clicked the play button, keeping the volume low but audible enough for the microphone in my pocket to catch the timestamp. Through the tiny speaker, the raspy, panicked voice of Reed Halverson filled my earpiece. You stay dead on paper. Morrow. If you breathe a word to your wife before the federal auditors close the books on the missing drone tech next quarter, I will personally ensure you both burn. I am keeping you out of the system. You just wait for the money to wash. I locked my phone screen and placed it face down on the polished mahogany table. I looked at Travis, who was still smiling, completely oblivious to the digital execution that had just taken place. I did not scream. I did not throw the pen at his face or demand to know why they had destroyed my life. I simply lowered my head, uncapped the pen, and signed my name on the exact dotted line he pointed to. I signed the document receipt, fully acknowledging that I was turning over the final piece of the estate. I wanted them to leave that bank feeling absolutely victorious. I wanted them to celebrate their successful theft. Thank you, Travis said, quickly snatching the paper off the table as if it might catch fire. You are making the right choice. I know I am, I replied softly, offering him a perfectly hollow smile. They left the conference room together, their footsteps echoing down the marble hallway. Brooke immediately opened a secure communication channel on her laptop. Execute the order, I said. 20 miles away. Mara Quill submitted the emergency ex parte injunctions to the federal judge. Within exactly 14 minutes, the massive gears of the financial system slammed shut. The bank accounts tied to Apex Ridge Holdings were frozen solid. The Nevada warehouse assets were locked. The Arizona duplex funds were legally paralyzed. Every single dollar they had stolen, every asset they had purchased with the blood money from my husband's fabricated death, was entirely trapped behind a wall of federal litigation. The trap had violently snapped shut, crushing the Mercer family inside. But my quiet victory was instantly shattered by a text message from Mara that flashed across my screen 5 minutes later. Federal marshals had just raided the corporate headquarters of Aegis Frontier Solutions to secure the fraudulent logistics documents. They found the office completely empty. The servers were wiped clean. And Vale Arden, the architect of the entire missing weapons operation, had vanished from his registered address less than an hour ago. The financial bleed was stopped, but the man holding the matches to burn us all down was now actively on the run. Tess Rowan did not just publish a story. She detonated a carefully constructed explosive device in the very center of the regional news cycle. At exactly 8 o'clock on Wednesday morning, the headline went live across 3 major investigative syndicates simultaneously. The bold, black letters read, "The Ghost Buyer: How a Dead Soldier Purchased Real Estate While His Widow Wept." The article was a masterpiece of lethal journalism. Tess did not use my name, but the implications were unmistakably clear. She laid out the timeline with brutal precision, detailing the exact number of days between the military casualty notification and the remote notary session in New Mexico. She exposed the flow of cash, the shell companies, and the alarming lack of federal oversight. Within 2 hours, the shockwaves hit. The military machinery panicked. Task Group. Vantage immediately suspended Reed Halverson, stripping him of his security clearance and confining him to his base quarters, pending a massive internal audit. The corporate world reacted with equal ferocity. I sat at my desk at Northline Integrity Group and watched through the glass partition as 2 private security guards escorted Owen Pike out of his corner office. He carried a single cardboard box, his face pale and sweating. He locked eyes with me for a fraction of a second before the elevator doors closed. I offered him absolutely nothing in return. No smile, no frown. Just the cold stare of an auditor who had successfully balanced the ledger. Travis Mercer, the arrogant architect of the real estate laundering scheme, instantly went into a frantic defensive posture. Brooke texted me screenshots of his social media accounts. He was posting long, rambling paragraphs claiming he was the victim of a massive misunderstanding, swearing he was only trying to protect the estate funds for a grieving family who could not handle the complex financial burden. But Deborah Mercer was a different breed of monster. She did not cower, and she did not retreat. She launched a vicious counteroffensive. At exactly 6 o'clock that evening, she appeared on the most viewed local television broadcast in the state. She wore a high-collared black dress, her hair perfectly styled to look elegantly distressed. I sat on my sofa and watched her look directly into the camera, manufacturing tears with terrifying ease. "My family is going through an unimaginable hell," Deborah sobbed, clutching a crumpled tissue. "We lost our brave boy, and now we are watching his widow completely unravel. Haley is profoundly unwell. She is suffering from a severe psychotic break. She is seeing ghosts. She is inventing wild conspiracies. And she is projecting her unbearable grief onto the people who have tried hardest to support her. We only wanted to help her manage the crushing reality of this tragedy. But she has chosen to drag my dead son's honorable name through the mud." It was a stunning display of public gaslighting. She was actively trying to poison the jury pool, painting me as a hysterical, delusional woman so the financial crimes would be dismissed as the ravings of a broken mind. I did not scream at the television. I did not log onto the internet to defend myself. I picked up my phone and called Mara Quill. "File it," I commanded. "File all of it right now." The following morning, the federal courthouse received a tidal wave of litigation. I filed a massive, multi-tiered civil lawsuit that hit every single player on the board simultaneously. I sued Travis Mercer and Deborah Mercer for systemic fraud, gross misappropriation of assets, and the forgery of electronic signatures. I sued Owen Pike for corporate negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. I sued Vale Arden and Aegis Frontier Solutions for conspiracy to commit fraud and deliberate obstruction of access to information. But the sharpest blade in the lawsuit was the charge of intentional infliction of severe emotional distress. I legally documented every single hug, every fake tear, and every manipulative conversation they used to keep me paralyzed while they looted my life. The legal trap was perfectly set. But the physical reality of the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. Late Friday night, my prepaid burner phone vibrated violently on the kitchen counter. It was Wyatt. The background noise on the call was chaotic. A loud, roaring wind and the hum of tires on an empty highway. "I had to run," Wyatt yelled over the static, his voice high and thin with absolute terror. Vale Arden sent a private security team to the cabin in Cedar Mesa. They kicked the front door in 10 minutes after I climbed out the back window. They are not looking for the money. Haley. They are hunting me for the original data drive. "Keep driving," I ordered, my pulse accelerating. "Do not stop until you cross the state line." "You do not understand the entire picture," Wyatt pleaded, his voice cracking under the crushing weight of his own guilt. "I have to tell you the truth before they find me." Before the deployment, Vale approached me privately. He offered me a highly classified supplementary bonus agreement. It was $50,000, wired directly into an untraceable account. The kitchen suddenly felt devoid of oxygen. "What did you do, Wyatt?" "I signed it," he confessed, sobbing openly into the phone. "I thought it was just standard hazard pay for keeping my mouth shut about the off-the-books logistics routing. I did not know he was planning to steal the entire weapons cache. I did not know it was a setup. Yet, by accepting those funds, I handed Reed the advantage he needed to coerce me into the staged fatality program. I orchestrated my own downfall. The last lingering fantasy I held about my husband completely dissolved. He was not a purely innocent soldier caught in a web of corruption. He was a man who had compromised his integrity for a payout. He had been blinded by greed and misplaced loyalty, and when the consequences of his actions came to collect, he allowed his commanders to fake his death and let his family cannibalize his wife to save his own skin. "Where are you heading?" I asked, my tone entirely devoid of warmth, pity, or love. He gave me the name of a cheap motel situated off a forgotten stretch of highway just outside the state border. "Go to room number 4, lock the door, and do not speak to anyone until I tell you to," I instructed. I terminated the call before he could say another word. I sat alone in the dark, the silence wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. The decision was absolute. This story was never going to end with a tearful reunion. We were never going to embrace, seek counseling, and pretend the foundation of our marriage was not built on a cemetery of lies. It had to end with total annihilation. Everyone who had weaponized my grief to line their pockets was going to burn in the light of the truth. A sharp, frantic knocking at my front door broke my concentration. I opened it to find Brooke and Mara standing on the porch. The cold night air rushed into the hallway, but it was the expression on Mara's face that chilled me to the bone. "We have a catastrophic problem," Mara announced, stepping quickly inside and slamming the door shut. My source inside the Federal Financial Crimes Network just intercepted a massive wire transfer request. Vale Arden is not just trying to clean up loose ends. He is abandoning ship. He is actively attempting to liquidate every single domestic asset tied to Aegis Frontier Solutions and convert the funds into untraceable offshore cryptocurrency wallets. He plans to vanish completely within the next 12 hours. Brooke looked at me, her eyes wide with panic. If he disappears with the money and the corporate infrastructure, the entire chain of command falls apart. Reed and Travis will just claim Vale orchestrated the entire thing without their knowledge. The slow, methodical game of chess was officially over. The board was on fire, and my opponent was making a run for the exit. I looked at the burner phone in my hand, then up at my sister and my lawyer. "We do not have the luxury of time anymore," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, uncompromising whisper. "We are going to force all of them into the exact same room, tonight." I needed a location isolated enough for criminals to feel safe, but contained enough to act as a trap. The bait was simple. I used the compromised corporate terminal at Northline Integrity Group. Fully aware Owen Pike's surveillance software was still passively running despite his termination, I typed out a frantic, easily intercepted email to my sister. I wrote that I had found a hidden safety deposit key taped behind our wedding portrait, belonging to a rental locker at the old industrial storage facility on Route 9, unit number 42, a unit Deborah used to rent. I explicitly mentioned a titanium flash drive and a handwritten tactical logbook. By 11 o'clock that night, the heavy coastal fog had rolled in. I stood inside the rusted corrugated metal walls of Unit 42. The space was completely empty save for a single overhead bulb casting harsh, sharp shadows, hidden in the adjacent locker. Brooke and Mara monitored 3 high-definition, low-light cameras and a multi-directional audio receiver. Every single word spoken in this concrete corridor was currently being transmitted to a secure cloud server. The sound of tires crunching on loose gravel pierced the silence. The heavy metal door at the end of the hallway groaned open. Footsteps echoed. Travis arrived first. He was visibly sweating despite the freezing temperature, clutching a heavy metal crowbar. He did not get a chance to use it. A second vehicle pulled up, its engine alow. Aggressive growl. Vale Arden stepped into the corridor, wearing a tailored charcoal overcoat, flanked by the disgraced commander, Reed Halverson. They converged in front of the rolled-down metal door of Unit 42. I reached up, grabbed the heavy chain, and violently threw the door open from the inside. They froze. "You are all terribly late," I said, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. I stepped out under the flickering light, my hands casually tucked into the pockets of my black coat. I was no longer the shattered widow they had left on the living room floor. Reed stepped forward, his military training taking over. He tried to puff his chest out, attempting to project the same intimidating authority he had used to terrorize my husband. Listen to me very carefully, Haley, Reed growled, pointing a thick finger at my face. You have absolutely no idea what kind of federal security protocols you are violating right now. Hand over the drive, go back to your empty house, and I might just let you walk away from this without a treason charge. I did not flinch. I took one deliberate step toward him. You do not give orders here, Reed. You are a suspended officer standing in a rented locker, hunting for the ghost you created to cover up a multi-million-dollar theft. Travis dropped the crowbar. The metallic clatter echoed sharply. His nerve broke completely. I told you this was a trap, Travis screamed, turning frantically toward Vale. I told you we should have just liquidated the offshore accounts and ran. I forged the dental records for the casualty identification. I used her fake power of attorney to move the money into the real estate shell companies if she has the drive. We are all going to federal prison. Vale. Arden turned his cold, reptilian gaze toward Reed. This entire operation is a catastrophic failure because of your sloppy field management, Vale hissed, stepping away from the disgraced commander. I contracted you to secure the tactical hardware, not to orchestrate a highly visible, completely botched domestic cover-up involving civilian real estate and a hysterical family. Reed's face twisted into an ugly sneer. He realized he was being set up as the sole fall guy. Do not dare put this entirely on me. Arden, Reed fired back, his voice booming down the corridor. I am not the only one who bought loyalty. Tell her about her precious mother-in-law. Tell her how you paid Deborah Mercer $100,000 in clean cash just to play the grieving mother. Deborah took the money to keep this woman drowning in fake sympathy, to keep her heavily medicated and distracted, so she would never look twice at the probate paperwork. The revelation hit the air like a physical shockwave. Deborah had sold my sanity for cash. She had watched me waste away, holding my hand, while her bank account grew, before I could even process the absolute depth of that maternal betrayal. A new shadow detached itself from the fog near the entrance. A heavy steel door slammed shut, locking us inside the corridor. Nobody is leaving, a deep, raspy voice announced. Wyatt stepped into the light. He looked entirely different from the terrified fugitive I had confronted in the desert. He stood tall, his shoulders squared, an undeniable military presence returning to his posture. In his right hand, he held a small black titanium flash drive. The real one. Travis gasped, stumbling backward against the aluminum siding. Reed's eyes widened in absolute shock. They thought they were hunting a ghost, but the ghost had just locked them in the graveyard. Wyatt, Reed barked, a desperate edge creeping into his command. Stand down. You give me that drive right now, and I can still protect you. I can still keep you out of the federal indictment. You cannot protect anyone. Reed, Wyatt replied coldly, walking deliberately toward the center of the group. He did not look at me to beg for forgiveness. He was not here to save our marriage. He was here to sever the chains. You forced me into a coffin while I was still breathing. You threatened my wife. You turned my own family into a syndicate of thieves. I am entirely done being dead. Reed lunged. He charged forward like a wounded bull, desperate to snatch the drive and destroy the only piece of physical evidence that could definitively end his life. Wyatt anticipated the strike. He sidestepped the heavy blow, driving his elbow violently into Reed's ribs. The commander hit the concrete floor hard, gasping for air. Vale immediately pulled a suppressed handgun from his tailored coat, pointing it directly at Wyatt's chest. Drop it, Vale commanded, his voice dead and emotionless. Shoot him, I said, my voice slicing through the chaos with absolute, chilling calm. Vale's eyes darted toward me, his weapon faltering for a fraction of a second. Shoot him, I repeated, staring directly into Vale's eyes. Pull the trigger. Vale. Add first-degree murder to the conspiracy and fraud charges. But you should know that you are standing in a fully wired acoustic trap. There are 3 hidden lenses pointing directly at your face, and every single confession, Travis, Reed, and you just made has already been transmitted to a secure cloud server monitored by an attorney and an investigative journalist. The local police are exactly 3 minutes away. Vale slowly lowered the weapon. The ruthless defense contractor recognized a checkmate when he saw one. He looked at the locked exit, then down at the drive in Wyatt's hand. Finally realizing that the meticulous web they had spent months weaving had just become their collective tomb, Reed remained on the floor, breathing heavily, completely defeated. Travis slid down the metal wall, burying his face in his hands, quietly sobbing as the distant wail of police sirens began to pierce the heavy coastal fog. The overlapping lies had violently collided, leaving absolutely no room for denial, negotiation, or escape. I stood amidst the ruins of the conspiracy, the flashing red and blue lights beginning to reflect off the wet pavement outside the storage facility. I knew that when the sun rose tomorrow, every single knot would be permanently untied. The arrests would be made, the accounts would be seized, and my name would be completely cleared. But as I looked at the man standing a few feet away, the man who possessed my husband's face but carried the soul of a stranger, a heavy silence settled over my heart. The war against them was over, but the final, agonizing decision regarding what to do with Wyatt in the aftermath of this wreckage still waited for me in the morning light. The morning after the storage unit confrontation felt like waking up from a decade-long fever. When the sun broke over the Virginia coastline, the sprawling network of lies completely disintegrated. Brooke and Mara had worked straight through the dawn, merging every single piece of evidence we had meticulously gathered over the past few weeks. The remote notary files, the forged electronic signatures, the labyrinth of life insurance wire transfers, the audio recording of the extortion, the shell company incorporation papers, and the raw tactical data Wyatt provided all fused together into an impenetrable federal indictment. The cover-up collapsed with breathtaking speed. Reed Halverson was stripped of his rank, his pension, and his freedom. He was marched out of his command center in federal handcuffs, facing a military tribunal and decades in a federal penitentiary for treason and grand larceny. Vale Arden never made it to his private airstrip. Federal marshals intercepted his vehicle 2 miles from the terminal, freezing his offshore accounts before a single cent could be transferred out of the country. Owen Pike, the man who sold my safety for a corporate kickback, found himself indicted for massive contract fraud, his lucrative corporate career reduced to a permanent criminal record. But the most satisfying collapse belonged to the Mercer family. Travis and Deborah had spent months hiding behind the sacred, untouchable shield of a grieving family. Now, they were exposed to the world as common thieves. During the civil trial, Mara Quill stood before the judge and meticulously traced every single stolen dollar. She proved that the secluded cabin in Cedar Mesa, the sanctuary Wyatt had purchased under a fabricated name, was funded entirely by the life insurance payout they had stolen using my forged signature. I looked directly at Deborah as Mara laid out the undeniable truth. Every single brick of that desert hideaway, every wooden beam of his fake life, was built entirely upon my agonizing, manufactured grief. The judge did not hesitate for a second. I won the civil suit completely. I reclaimed full ownership of all the stolen assets, secured massive punitive damages, and most importantly, I publicly destroyed the malicious narrative Deborah had tried to spin on local television. I was never a delusional, hysterical widow. I was the woman who outsmarted all of them. The criminal trials were looming, but Wyatt made a decision that finally broke his pattern of cowardice. He did not run. He did not accept a quiet plea deal behind closed doors. He stood before the federal prosecutors and confessed to absolutely everything. He handed over the decoded ledgers, testified directly against Reed and Vale, and fully accepted the severe legal and reputational consequences of his actions. For the very first time in our entire history together, he did not prioritize his own fear and survival over the truth. He asked to see me one last time before his formal sentencing. We met in a sterile, brightly lit visitor room at the federal holding facility. He looked utterly exhausted, stripped of the military armor and the fake identities. He sat across the cold metal table and looked at my hands, immediately noticing my bare ring finger. "I am not asking for forgiveness right now," Wyatt said, his voice quiet and broken. I know we have to walk through absolute hell to pay for what I did, but when this is over, when I serve my time, I want to try again, not as the people we were, but as two people who know the absolute highest cost of lies. I want a second chance to be the man you actually deserved. I looked at him. I did not feel the blinding rage I had felt in the desert, nor the crushing despair I had felt crying on my bedroom floor. I just felt a profound, unshakable clarity. I did not stop loving him overnight. The human heart does not work like a simple machine that can be switched off on command. But I had learned a brutal lesson about the anatomy of betrayal. No, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly steady and resolute. There is no second chance. Wyatt, you being honest today does not erase the months you let me suffocate in a grave you helped dig for me. You chose to let me mourn a ghost because it was easier for you than facing the consequences of your greed. I cannot build a life with a man who knows exactly how to watch me drown. He closed his eyes, a single tear cutting through the harsh fluorescent light, and nodded slowly. He knew I was right. I stood up, pushed my metal chair back, and walked out of the room without ever looking back. I legally reclaimed my maiden name. I am Haley Nelson. I sold the massive coastal house, scrubbing the final remnants of the Mercer legacy from my life. It held too many ghosts, too many dark shadows of a marriage that never truly existed. With a significant portion of the civil compensation money, I established a small, aggressive legal defense foundation. I partnered with Mara Quill to provide immediate, ruthless legal representation to military families who found themselves trapped in the confusing, predatory web of post-service benefit fraud. I took the exact weapon they used to destroy me and turned it into a heavy shield for others. I walked out of the federal courthouse on a Tuesday morning. The winter air was biting and cold, but the sunlight reflecting off the white marble steps felt incredibly warm against my face. I pulled my black coat tight around my shoulders and took a deep, unrestrained breath. I was no longer a grieving widow. I was no longer a helpless pawn waiting to be saved by a corrupt system. I was a woman who had meticulously burned down the entire theater they built around me. I had taken back my name, my money, and the absolute power to decide exactly who gets to exist in the story of my life. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let me know where you are listening from in the comments below so we can interact and share our thoughts together. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the Olivia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support me further by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by many more people.